overthinking can stifle people. The way they think that they're overthinking.
To some extent, it can. In my experience, the people who think that they're overthinkers are the people who think about the same things over and over, meaning asking themselves the exact same questions over and over. And because they don't have an answer to it, they don't do anything. They just keep asking themselves the same question. Or, yeah, and in that instance, if they're overthinking, perhaps they're also not seeking wise counsel. They're not seeking guidance from other people. They're just thinking about it themselves. Chances are their answer doesn't come that way. In my experience, the fastest way to get the answer is to get in motion, to start doing something. The more you start to do things, the more exposure you get. The more exposure you get, the closer you get to actually receiving the answer. Not only through your own experience, but also by interacting with other people who have a similar interest, who may have been doing it longer than you're doing it. And so you have the opportunity to have conversations with these people and probably get the answer from someone else, meaning that person that you're looking for, as opposed to just sitting back thinking about things. It reminds me of when someone told me it's easier to get a job when you have a job. When I was fresh out of college, I didn't understand that. Because in my mind, at that point, you have a certain amount of time in a day, and you can allocate a certain amount of hours per day toward finding a job. If you get a job, meaning if you go work at McDonald's, but you really want an office job, let's say in construction, working at McDonald's takes time away from you finding a job in construction, especially considering the fact that for a lot of people, especially when you're first starting out, looking for a job is like having a job. It seems like a very tedious process and a very long process that requires multiple hours throughout the day. So if you're working at McDonald's, you have less time to actually pursue this job that you're looking for. But when you work at McDonald's, you have more of an opportunity to meet people who can plug you in to this conference or this agency or this environment, whatever it may be, or wherever it may be, where recruiters or people who are looking for someone with your skill set can find you. Right? Maybe the manager's cousin works at a construction organization and you can speak to that person. From that person, you can meet another person. Then meet another person and another person who actually gives you an opportunity. But when you're younger, you don't understand the dynamics of business and understand how networking works, and that you have to give something like actual work, actual value, not just time filling out an application. It doesn't make sense to you that having a job is the easiest way to find a job. So it goes back to the concept of doing helps you to think because it gives you more context. It gives you more of an opportunity, of course, to have experience, and that experience provides more content that you can think about. And perhaps the content that it's providing is the answer that you were looking for, thinking that thinking harder was going to give it to you. But in all actuality, it's doing more that gives you the answers to what you're thinking about in a lot of instances.
When you're looking at job applications, I stumble sometimes on something that I like, but you need to have like certain uh, experiences, but also know certain programs very specific to the company. Would it still be worth it to apply if you have no idea like how to work several programs?
Based on the context of the job description, perhaps it would be still worth it to apply to a job opportunity that requires you learning or knowing a certain platform that you may not really be fluent at or be very proficient at. Is 90% of the job that platform, or is it 10%? If it's 10%, then yes, you should still apply. If it's 90%, and looking through the job application, you see that you have to be rather proficient at this platform in order to actually execute the job description, then no, you shouldn't apply to that job. And oftentimes, you don't have to be an expert at the platform in order to execute the job well. And also, the number one skill that you need to execute any job well is learning how to learn. So if you're a fast learner, you can apply for a position. Let's say that position requires that you have 2 years of experience in Photoshop, for example. If you're a fast learner, you can apply to that position, have an amazing cover letter, resume, mention having exposure, not being proficient at the platform, but having been exposed to the platform, and speak about some of the things that you were doing or interested in doing, which led to the exposure to the platform. And use that exposure as a way of saying, if granted the opportunity, I believe that I can learn this platform rather quickly because of XYZ. Let's say you get a call back and they say, yes, we liked your application. We have these slots open for interview dates. Which one works best for you? Don't choose the last slot. If there's 3 slots, for example, because you want to give the impression that you're enthusiastic about the position. Also, don't choose the first slot because you want to give the impression that you're busy with other interviews because you're a hot commodity in the space and you have options. But another reason why you wouldn't choose the first slot is because you don't want to have the interview too soon because you really don't know enough about the platform yet. You want to take some time to get more exposure to the platform. And now that you know you're going to be interviewed, you have a reason to dig deeper into the platform. So you choose the middle slot. And you make sure that whatever time has been allocated between the day you accept that interview and the day you actually have the interview, you study as much as you can about this platform. In this example being Adobe. You really don't need to go beyond a basic functionality so much, because the proficiency that they're looking for is only 2 years. And you did not mention that you were an expert. You didn't mention that you had 2 years of experience. You mentioned that you had exposure to the platform. Right? So what you want to emphasize is that that exposure that you have was enough to understand the fundamentals. And because you understand the fundamentals, the chance of you being able to come on board at that organization and be able to contribute value within that position to that organization within the first 90 days or first 120 days is highly likely. So yes, if there is a job opportunity that is available to you, but you're lacking all of the skills that are supposedly required to execute that job accordingly. And let's say, for example, it's not having or not being proficient on a certain platform. Again, in this example, Photoshop. You should still apply, especially if you can do 60% of the job without being on Photoshop.
When not having a very specific career path yet, do you see any value in doing a master's?
No, I don't see any value in doing a master's or completing a master's degree if you don't have any idea as to what you want to do professionally. Unless you're going to get a rather general master's degree, which doesn't make sense. Right? That was the point of the bachelor's degree. The master's degree is to specialize in something. But if you don't know what you want to specialize in, then it doesn't make sense to get a master's degree. Especially not in America. Because that master's degree is probably going to run you $100,000. So, especially if it's like an MBA or something like that. You can get other master's degree for cheaper. But if it's a well-known degree, meaning a degree that is in high demand, then then don't get it unless you are sure that this is the direction that you want to take your life into or your career into for the next 5 years at least. But even if you do know where you want to take your career, if you don't really have any experience in the real world, meaning any real professional experience, I still wouldn't advise a person to get a master's degree. Because you don't have any context. So it's harder for the information to stick in a master's degree. And with a master's degree, you have less time to learn information. So if you don't have any exposure to the information that you're learning in the real world, meaning in a practical sense, you don't remember very much of it. So you spend a lot of money, you get a piece of paper at the end of it, but you don't really understand what you were supposed to be learning. So it's not worth it. When you have some exposure, for example, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, more like 20, 25 years ago, when people were getting master's degrees, they had some exposure. Let's say, for example, you got an MBA. You got an MBA 10, 15 years after you got your bachelor's degree. And you had a decade or more of experience in the real world, in real business. When the recession happened, the Great Recession of 2007, a lot of people were out of work and the competition was stiff. So people started going to get master's degrees that didn't actually have any experience, hoping that in having a higher quote unquote quality of education, it would increase their chances of landing an employment opportunity. To a large extent, it worked. So then the standard became, for a lot of organizations, if you don't have any experience, to have a master's degree. If you do have experience, you can bypass it, even if it says a master's degree is required or a master's degree is preferred. If you don't have a master's degree, but you have 10 years of experience, chances are you'll get a call back. 10 years of relevant experience, that is. I say that to say nowadays it may be a bit different as to what an employer would require. Also, there's more people with bachelor's degrees. 30, 40, 50 years ago, there weren't so many people with bachelor's degrees. Everybody did not go get a bachelor's degree. Then different generations started to notice that the more formal education you had, chances are the more money you made in these organizations. So they all wanted their children to get a higher level of education than they had. Eventually, that leads to everyone being an extremely educated person. So now you have this very educated society. And because of that, now the pendulum swings the other way. Because we can't solely rely on you being educated. Because more people are educated. So now that's not so special. Now you have to either be very specialized, have a very niche education, something that's not so popular, and for that reason you're in high demand, or you have to have a lot of experience, and for that reason you're in high demand. It can't just be the degree anymore because so many people have degrees. Yeah.
I hear of a lot of people when they graduate either high school or college, they go traveling to find themselves, to figure out what they want. Do you think traveling is the, a good way to go about that?
I think going to college, especially going away to college, will probably give you what you think you're going to find traveling, especially if you're traveling for a short period of time. Okay? If you're traveling for a year, perhaps you'll learn a lot, but probably not as much as you think. If and you probably will not get the opportunity to experience as much as you think, especially if you're like backpacking or something like that, right? Because you're moving around quite a bit. You may be here for 2 weeks, there for a month, there for 6 weeks, there for a week, there for a month, there for. You're not staying anywhere long enough to really dive into the culture, really understand what it's like to get adjusted to another way of life with a different group of people in a different part of the world doing very different things. You have exposure to it. Probably not enough to really make a solid decision that's well thought out with enough information to really have an informed understanding based on real experience, lived experience. Whereas in college, oftentimes in the United States at least, you have people coming from all areas of life and different regions of the world. And y'all are in the same place at the same time doing the same thing at the same age, which is very unique. Very unique. And you got the opportunity to spend time with these people, to speak with them for months and years even, really develop real friendships with them, probably travel with them. They say, hey, we going home for Christmas break. And you say, hey, I'm going to be in that region. Oh, hey, you should come over. You should come home with me. Next thing you know, you go home with somebody for 2, 3 weeks and you're from New York, but you spend 3 weeks in Sri Lanka with someone you actually know. That has more substance to it than traveling does. Traveling throughout different regions for very short periods of time. That is, would probably have. And you can always get a standard degree, right? A degree in business. And not go to the most expensive college, but take college seriously. Learn as much as you can, meet as many people as you can, do as much as you can. Because again, that's the only time you're going to have that type of experience in your life. When you take a leap year and come back, it's not the same. If you come back. Because chances are you won't come back. And if you do come back, you probably won't come back in the time frame that you said you would come back. Perhaps you said, I'm going to take 6 months off and then I'm going to go on an off semester to college. Maybe you did want to take a gap year. 1 gap year turns to 3 gap years. Because life is not going to stop happening because you decided to take a gap year. Instead of having the obligation of school, now you have more of an obligation of life. Okay, you're not going to school. Are you going to get a job? Because not everyone is fortunate enough to travel in order to figure out what they want to do. Perhaps your parents are not going to allow you to lay on a couch for a year. That's not doing anything for your life. That's not helping you figure out what you want to do. So you start working. It's very easy to get sucked into that life of I'm working, I'm making my own money, I'm meeting friends, you're probably blowing all of the money because you're very young. Right? You get caught up in that life. What are the chances of you actually going and saying, hey, let me go to school now in 1 year? If you wait 2, 3 years, you missed out on the opportunity now of what college can really offer holistically. Because now you're going to school at 21. Everyone that's your age is graduating next year. You're in a class with a bunch of freshmen who don't have any context about what it is that you may have experienced over the past 3 years, because they came directly from directly from high school into college. So they know the collegiate experience better than you do. But you feel like you know life better than they do. So that connection is not there. But yet you're on campus. So now you're trying to connect with all of the older kids, but you don't necessarily relate to them. You don't have any of the classes that they have. You don't share their experience. And they don't share yours. Because although you're now a freshman the way that they once were, you're not a freshman in the same capacity that they were. So there's still a disconnect there. So the social aspect of college, which is very important, probably the most important. You're probably going to take more from that than you are from your actual classes. And a lot of what you take from your actual classes, you're going to take from those classes because of the social interactions connected to those classes. If you're not aligned with the students, you don't really get that opportunity in the way that you could. Of course, you're going to still have study groups. Of course, you can still have a tutor. Of course, you can still go out, have a good time, make friends. But it's a different experience. The type of person you were at 17 versus the type of person you were at 23, although it's not a lot of years in between, there's a noticeable difference in most instances, in my experience at least. So that that gap year to travel and find yourself, for some it may work. I'm not saying that it doesn't work for anyone, but I think chances are perhaps you can find what you think you're going to find traveling at school. Because that new experience that you're looking for is probably something that you can experience at school. And it's probably better for you to experience it at school, because in school, it's more of a controlled environment. In the real world, it isn't. And that's what college is. College is that is the middle ground between your parents' house and the real world. In college, you'll really have the opportunity to dive into other cultures and really experience life with other people, sharing an experience with them in a way that is very unique. So I'm not knocking the gap year. I just think that college provides a better opportunity to learn in some instances. Perhaps.
Oftentimes, when I used to watch a lot of Gary Vee videos, he always talked about kids between the ages of like 20 and 30 to really not think too much ahead and just grind out like the years that they have to really hustle to work on whatever they're really passionate about. How much do you share that sentiment?
I think that you have to be rather privileged in order to do that. You have to be, if you have no money, if you come from the projects, you're the first one to graduate from college in your family. You work very hard in college. You're very intelligent. You went to some of the best institutions that the United States or that your country has to offer. Australia, London, Canada, right? Some of the best institutions that those countries have to offer, whatever country you're from. And your family is living an impoverished lifestyle. Perhaps your main objective is to make sure that you can do the most that you possibly can for your family. So you don't necessarily think you have the luxury of not taking your future very seriously and saying, I'm just going to grind it out and do a bunch of passion projects. Yes, you'll learn a lot doing those passion projects. but perhaps you don't think you have the privilege of working on passion projects, because a passion project in a lot of instances, as far as your career is concerned or your resume, all of those passion projects are really like nice to haves, right? They're not requirements. Right? It's like I was filming for 2 years because I thought that was cool. I thought that was something I would be interested in. I was playing a piano for 2 years and joined this volunteer group because I thought that would be nice. I was playing the piano in a residential facility for the elderly. I was doing all of these things that you thought was cool. Maybe it moved the needle as far as exposing your character, a larger range of your character to you, and helping you to understand different things about life. But as far as your career is concerned, it didn't really move the needle a whole lot. Right? So now you have 10 years on your resume with a lot of random experiences that don't really point in any one direction particularly. You're turning 30 years old, and what happens a lot with people when they turn 30 years old is they realize that they're no longer young. So a lot of the games that they used to play, they realize, I might want to start wrapping this up. Whether they do it or not is a different conversation, but it at least crosses their mind. Right? And if you want to start getting your life on track, what would it mean? Essentially, you will be starting at entry-level positions in your 30s because you spent your 20s focusing on passion projects. If you had the privilege to focus on a passion project. Because for the people who didn't necessarily have the privilege to focus on a passion project, they were focused on the requirements because they were focused on actually taking care of their family, actually making sure that they can afford health care for their parent, their single parent, making sure that they have life insurance, making sure that they have proper dental care because they've gone throughout the first 22, 25 years of their lives without proper dental coverage. They've spent the first 25 years of their lives with improper nutrition, high levels of stress, which led to disease in their family. These are requirements that require a person to be more serious about their lives, not focus on passion projects. So if you have the opportunity to focus on a passion project, great. And perhaps those were the people that he was speaking of, and thus speaking to. But there are a lot of people who don't have the privilege of focusing on a passion project. So no, I do not share that sentiment that people should focus on a passion project or multiple passion projects in their 20s. I do think that they shouldn't take turning 30 too seriously. I do share that sentiment. But get the basics in your life covered. And then slowly begin to ease into what you're passionate about. Because it's hard to even enjoy passion projects if you're still in survival mode.
But putting diet and sleep almost second to your dreams and passion.
Something that Gary Vee talks about a lot is being self-aware. And I think perhaps the reason why he talks about being self-aware so often is because he understands that some of the things he says and how he says them meaning with such passion, with such conviction, can come across as if this is the end all be all. And it's not. For some people, they can ignore their health. They have great genes. They have no diseases. They have no health issues. Poor health does not run in their family, quote unquote. In other words, meaning they don't have generations and generations of a poor diet, generations and generations of post-traumatic stress disorder, generations and generations of etc., etc., etc. That could potentially lead to poor health. So yeah, those people can completely disregard sleep, completely disregard eating properly, or completely disregard stress levels. They have some leverage to do that, but not everyone does. And perhaps even the people who do have the leverage to do that would work better, more efficiently, more effectively if they didn't do that. So thinking long term, yes, you have more energy in your 20s than you may have in your 30s, and thus in your 40s, 50s, and etc. But if you play in a long game, which is also something that he talks about, not looking for quick results, right? Not being afraid to do it the hard way, not being afraid to take the long route. Take your time. That doesn't mean act like you have more time than you have. That doesn't mean don't exercise a high sense of urgency. It means focus on balancing your life to the best of your ability. Not just focusing so much on your finances that you forget about everything else, including your health. Because you're probably not going to be successful for very long without your health. Gary Vee was a person that had to see that for himself. Because during his youth, it didn't seem like he cared about his health very much. It was later in life where he started to lose weight, started to eat better, and it showed. And he's been able to maintain that. If he could have done that 10, 15, 20 years earlier, perhaps he would feel even better than he feels today, physically. Health is the real wealth. Maintain your health for as long as you can, and do everything that you possibly can to maintain your health for as long as you can, as soon as you can. Because the longer you remain healthy, the better your life will be. Because at the end of the day, we're all doing this for an experience because we have a feeling attached to that experience. It's not really about the money. Without your health, there's not very much you can do. And you'll notice that when you lose your health. And when you lose your health, you won't care about anything else. You won't care about that thing that you were once so passionate about. It won't matter anymore. So keep the main thing the main thing. And in your life, your health is the main thing. Everything else is secondary. But that concept can even be applied to business. Keep the main thing the main thing. Yes, you have different aspects of the business. Yes, you have different ways in which you acquire attention for what it is that you're doing. Yes, you have different revenue streams, all those different things. But whatever the foundation of that business is, maintain that. Keep the main thing the main thing in your business, but more importantly, in your life. And health is the main thing in life. Nothing is more important than that.
there's very little being taught on health in formal education, unless that's what you study. And sometimes doctors, they have a very Western approach, obviously, to medicine, to healing, to living a healthy life. To what extent should people do their own research?
Formal education doesn't really teach anyone anything that's not consciously in pursuit of whatever that discipline is that they're interested in. For example, if you're studying business, you're probably not going to learn a lot about health. But if you're studying health, you're probably not going to learn a whole lot about business. Life is dynamic, so we should study as much as we possibly can about the things that are fundamental to our experience. Health is very fundamental because without it, you don't have a life. So regardless to what it is that you're doing, you want to know as much as you possibly can about health. You don't want to rely on a doctor because by the time you get to the doctor, chances are something's already wrong. Because in most instances, people don't think to go to the doctor unless something is wrong. How do you evaluate your own body? How do you stay centered enough in your body to even feel your body? Because most people, if you pay attention to statistics, especially in the United States, don't exercise. So if you don't exercise, what are you doing to land in your body? To feel your body, to use your body? It's not until you do something different with your body than you're accustomed to doing with your body that you actually create a mind-muscle connection in a way that reminds you of the capability of your body. And there are some places in the world where people are not very practiced at such movements. And so they don't even feel their bodies until something goes wrong. They're 45 years old. They've been walking every day of their lives for as long as they can remember, at least. When they get up and walk, they're not really feeling the walk. They feel their bodies when they do something different, like they're walking up the stairs. Then they feel their bodies because their body is sending a signal to their brain saying, this is different. When they're in the gym, if ever, they feel their bodies because they have to be present enough within their bodies to truly build their bodies. But considering the fact that a lot of people aren't in the gym, most people aren't in the gym or training. You don't have to go to the gym to train. But considering the fact that most people are not training, they don't know how to land within their bodies. And so they don't feel something going wrong until it does. And by that time, you have to go to the hospital. And now because you haven't studied the human body, you don't really know anything about biology, you don't really know anything about human anatomy, you probably don't know anything about chemistry, definitely not organic chemistry. You probably don't know anything about Eastern medicine. You probably don't know anything about Ayurveda treatment. You probably don't know anything about acupuncture. You're at the mercy of the people in the hospital now. And I believe as of 2015, the third leading cause, if I'm not mistaken, of death in hospitals was malpractice, meaning a doctor making a mistake. So it's important to understand as much as you can about your health and to take it very seriously so that you don't have a reason to go to the hospital. Yes, some people would argue, go get a checkup just in case. Okay, that can be debated. But if something's wrong, be connected enough to yourself to know that something's wrong and do something about it. Know what to do about it. Because nowadays, there's a lack of trust. For example, due to malpractice, leading to these significant numbers in deaths for patients at hospitals. There's a lack of trust. So today, you got to be your own everything in a lot of instances. Entrepreneurship, you got to be your own boss because you got to care about your family. Your finances is your responsibility. There was once a time when organizations had pension plans. They don't really have them so much anymore. There was a time when organizations were all interested in 401k plans. Not that many organizations are interested in that anymore. But they're also not paying you anymore. Meaning they're not giving you a higher salary. They're not paying you any more money than they once were, considering the fact that they're offering less than they once were. So essentially it's do it yourself. And if you got to do it yourself, then you might as well work for yourself. That's part of what's feeding this entrepreneurship craze. So I got to be my own boss. Now, because of malpractice at hospitals, I got to be my own nurse. I got to be my own doctor. Because of all the scams that go along with banks and private investing and, fiduciaries that are also brokers who get paid off of back end deals from things that they should be doing to help you. But instead, they're trying to help themselves. Now you got to be your own fiduciary. Now you got to be your own broker. You got to be your own hedge fund. Because at the end of the day, this company can go out of business. The brokerage itself can go out of business. Not just Apple, not just Microsoft. Very unlikely that they'll go out of business, at least in the foreseeable future. But it can happen. And it's up to you to see that ahead of time and make the adjustment so that you can take care of your family. Because at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to do that. So in every major area of life, nowadays we hear a lot about therapy, mental health, almost as if it's the responsibility of the therapist to make sure you have great mental health. But it isn't. It's yours. So today you almost have to be your own everything, not just your own doctor. But if you understand that you have to be your own everything in all these other areas, perhaps you should know that it's important to study health as well. Because maybe in addition to being responsible for all the other aspects of your life, your health is also your responsibility.
as far as credible knowledge, because anyone nowadays can pose as an expert when it comes to finances, when it comes to fitness, lifestyle, therapy. There's a lot of self proclaimed experts nowadays. So, how can you be wary of that and see or know if the information is credible without you being that? Because you started out, so you don't know anything really.
So you can't really understand that. Perhaps the objective is to go to the professionals, go to doctor such and such in every aspect. If you're trying to learn about economics, try to learn economics from a professor, someone who really understands the theory of it. If you're trying to learn business, try to learn business from a professor. Then go and research Fortune 500 executives or research the people who built different countries from a business perspective and read about them. Try to understand as much as you possibly can about them. But at least by that time, you have the language so you can understand what's being said about them. You can understand what they're doing. A lot of finance is that. It's the language. It's the same thing in medicine. A lot of medicine is a language. So to a large extent, that's the barrier of entry. So if you want to understand the foundation of something, go to the people who are most knowledgeable and their knowledge is vouched for. That's why that's why school made sense. Because the people who were a part of a certain discipline protected that discipline. And because they cared about the discipline, they were the gatekeepers. You had to go through them to become verified. Now with the internet, people can just tell you what worked for them. It's great that it worked for you, but look for the science behind it. Look for what makes that person credible, not just because they have a lot of posts and they talk a lot about a certain subject. If you don't know anything about that subject, you don't know if it actually has any substance. Go learn about the subject first. Before being intrigued by the individual that's speaking about it. But in order to do that, you have to be interested in education. And the reason why we seem to fall for these self-proclaimed experts is because they're entertaining. It was perceived as boring to sit in the classroom and listen to someone talk about erosion in physics and not do it with a lot of personality and a lot of jokes and, special effects with the lights and whatever in the classroom. That's boring to a lot of people. So they're not interested in that. But if you have someone online that's making it interesting, then chances are you're going to pay closer attention, even if that person doesn't actually know what they're talking about. But they know how to make you listen or make you pay attention. So at some point, it's It's on the person. Do you want to be educated or do you want to be entertained? If you want to be entertained more than you want to be educated, then chances are you're more likely to be interested in a self-proclaimed expert. But if you're more educated or more interested in being educated, perhaps you'll sit through the boring aspects of it, and then the actual information will become entertaining. You becoming more intelligent is what becomes entertaining. That's when you officially become a nerd. That's the nerd. The nerd is the person who gets excited about the problem they solve, not excited about the person that's teaching them how to solve the problem.